to Unit 5, Using Pre-Built Methods. This unit is devoted to looking at some of the built-in libraries that you get with Java out of the box. We'll start with looking at APIs, or Application Programming Interfaces, and how to read the online Java documentation. We'll also look at the math class, which is a library that you'll use quite often. Another library that you'll use heavily are wrapper classes for parameter types. And finally, we'll look at the string methods and formatting output with the printf method. So as you can see, we don't have necessarily a lot to go in, but it's helpful to take some time in really learning these classes here because you're going to use them quite often. When working on a programming problem, you should normally check to see if there are pre-built classes that meet your program's needs. If there are such pre-built classes, then use those classes. Don't reinvent the wheel. So we're going to look at a couple of those on the next slide. So there's quite a few API classes that we'll use, and even at the introductory level. So first is the fact that user input can get rather complicated. And so as you've seen already, we'll use the scanner class to handle that user input. And one of the classes that you haven't seen yet is the math class. And just like user input, math calculations can get sometimes rather complicated. And whenever you need to perform non-trivial math calculations in a program, you're going to want to use the math class's methods rather than writing your own. When writing a program, you also need to manipulate primitive types like ints and doubles and whatnot. So one example of this is converting primitives to strings. And so to do that, we're going to use wrapper classes. And we're going to go into how to use those wrapper classes for converting ints to strings and string to ints, and you'll see later on in the lesson. And finally, we'll use the string API class to help us perform manipulations on strings. So in order for you to get the most out of using the API classes, you're going to need to understand how to RTFM, or read the flippin' manual. You can find Java documentation for all of the Java APIs at this link here. But pay attention to what version of Java you're running though. If you use the version 8 of the JDK, or Java Development Kit, then you're going to want to replace the 7 in the link below with an 8. And so we'll look at some examples in a bit, but before I get there, we need to go over a few more things. Some things, like strings, are built into the Java core, and while other things like scanner are not. And when you want to use one of the API classes, like scanner, you first need to tell the compiler to expect it. And you do this by putting an import statement at the beginning of the file that's going to use it, like you see here. And the scanner class is part of the java.util package. And a package is nothing more than a way of grouping classes together. So this part of the program right here, this part of the import statement, tells which package you're importing, and this is the class. So the scanner right here, that's the class that you're importing. You also have the option, instead of using scanner, you could just do java.util.star, or an asterisk. Let's see if I can do this with paint here. And that will import everything that's in the java.util package. While some classes have to be imported into your program, other classes are part of the Java core and will work right out of the box. The Java core plus any imported classes plus your defined classes equals your program. The math and string classes are examples of classes included in the core. In fact, anything that is included automatically can be found in the java.lang package. The Java compiler automatically inserts the statement at the top of every Java program. You just won't see it. The asterisk is a wildcard, as I showed you on the previous slide, and it's meant that all classes in the java.lang package are imported, not just the math class. If you want to include classes that aren't part of the Java core, like scanner or ArrayList, you simply use the import statement with the package that you want to import. Here you see us using the Java import java.util.star to import the entire utility library. Alternatively, you could just import a single class by using the class name instead of the asterisk. So you can see here we have the asterisk that imports the entire java.util package, and here we are importing individual classes. And this is generally viewed as being more concise because it tells whoever's reading your code that you explicitly are going to use this class, whereas if you use the entire package, it kind of says, well, I don't really know exactly what I'm going to need, so I'm just going to import everything. So if you can, use the individual classes unless you have a lot of them, and then it makes sense just to go ahead and import the entire package. To use an API class, you don't need to know the internals of the class and how it all works. You just need to know how to interface with it. And to interface with a class, you need to know how to use the methods that are inside of that class. So for example, to perform an input, you need to know how to use the scanner class's methods, such as next, next line, next int, etc. To use the methods, you need to know what type of arguments to pass into them. You also need to know what type of return value it will have. All of this information leads us to the standard way to show what all that information is, and that's called the API heading. So here you see the next int method, and this is the source code heading for the scanner class. Okay, well, the scanner class's next int method. So for starters, anything that starts with public is available to you to use. And so anything that's in the Java API library is going to be shown up as public, because if it was private, you wouldn't be able to use it. And we'll get into what all that means with access modifiers later. But for now, just know that if something starts with public, that means it's available for to use. Next is the return type. And in this example, we are returning an integer. So this method, when it's done, is going to return an integer. And then finally, any arguments that is required by this method are going to show up inside of the parentheses. And obviously, with this case, there is no arguments to pass in. There's no parameters. So it's blank. So it's empty. All of this, when it's done, allows us to know what we have to do with it. So here you see example. We are declaring an integer called days, and we're calling the standard in object's next int method. So standard in is a instantiated object of the scanner class. So as such, it can call the next int method. This next int is going to go to the console, get the next integer, and return it, which means, say it's 3. Well, now 3 is going to get stored in the days variable. Okay? So that's how that works. So here you can see I pulled up the Java documentation for the Java 8. Okay, they've currently released Java 9, but for this case we're just going to look at 8. So you can see here we have all classes, and here we have a list of packages. And there's tons of packages that you can use to import into your Java program. And we're going to cover some of these through the course of the program, but for now, let's take a look at one that we use pretty often. So java.util. All right, so now within the java.util, there's interfaces, which we'll talk about next semester, I believe, and classes. So in this class, you see we've got calendar, we've got dictionary, currency, date. There's all these wonderful classes that allow us to do things that we don't have to recreate on our own. So in this case, let's take a look at the scanner class. We click on scanner class, and you can see here, it tells us that, hey, we're in the scanner class, right? And it here shows what interfaces it implements, and again, we're going to talk about that later, so don't worry about it for now. And you can scroll down, and it talks about the scanner class and gives you all the information that you need to know about it. And so it talks about its constructors, which we'll talk about later, but here's the main section that you want to be paying attention to for now, is the method summary. And this will tell you every method that you can use. So we have close, delimiter, has next. You can has next with a pattern, so you can put in a regex expression. You can return, does it have a next big integer number? There's all kinds of different ones. And you can see here, it tells us what type it's returning. So has next requires no arguments, and it returns a Boolean. So it returns true or false. And you can come down here and you can say, okay, what about int? Look at that, next int. And it returns an int. So everything here is public. If we click on this, you can see what we talked about. Next int, here is the API heading. It's public, it returns an integer, and that's the method name, and any arguments would show up here. Okay? And you can read it, and it talks about what it does. And so you can do this for any of the Java API classes and methods. So it really benefits you to be able to look up information within the Java documentation so you can learn how something is supposed to work. Let me go back here. So let's look up another example. Let's see here. Let's look at a vector. So a vector is a special type of array that you can use and extend the size of it and change it and manipulate it. And so we can look in here, and it tells us how to construct it. And we can look at the methods of all the things that we can use on a vector. Like we can add an element, we can pass in an object, or we can see what the current capacity of the vector is, or we can clear it, or we can clone it, which is like making a copy. So you can see here that it tells you how to do everything that you can do with that particular class. Now, in addition to that, a lot of the advanced IDEs like IntelliJ, like Eclipse, some of the bigger ones, what they have is they have all this documentation built into the program, or it actually pulls it from the web interactively. And so as you're typing, when you have a class in your program and you hit the dot button, it will actually pull up all of the methods that you have available to you. I believe Microsoft calls it IntelliSense. I forget what the other IDEs call it. But so if I were to have a, in this case, a vector object, and I hit the dot and started typing SET, it would pull up this set size, and it would have all this documentation built into the IDE. So some of the big IDEs can really help out in that sense, but with that comes a lot more difficulty setting them up and all that stuff. So that's why we stick to a very basic IDE, but it definitely helps you to understand how to look up those classes and packages within the Java documentation here.